Last week, we heard the story of the feeding of the 5,000. This week, that same crowd finds Jesus, no doubt in hopes of getting another free lunch. But this time, Jesus does not just address their physical needs. He attempts to offer them spiritual food. Last Sunday, I spoke to you about Maslow's hierarchy of needs, the idea that you have to meet a person's basic security needs, like food and shelter, before you can address their self-actualization needs, their spiritual needs. This is a good rule to follow when helping others, but sometimes I wonder why it seems that even though we address the physical needs, the spiritual needs really never get addressed. Maybe sometimes we feel like it would be too pushy to talk about spiritual matters when someone comes to us for food or help with their electric bill. Well, Jesus does not hesitate to shift to spiritual needs in this morning's gospel. He fed these people once. Now it is time to talk about their deeper needs. What is that crowd's and our deeper need? Sometimes, even when we think we have everything we need, don't we all still feel that hunger for that elusive something more? Something more that we can't quite identify. In his autobiography, Surprised by Joy, C.S. Lewis suggests that joy points beyond itself. He described it as an unsatisfied desire which is itself more desirable than any other satisfaction. I doubt whether anyone who has tasted it would ever, if both were in his power, exchange it for all the pleasures of the world. In St. Augustine's classic Confessions, he describes his experiences of unfulfilled desire. In the very first paragraph of the book, he writes, "Thou hast made us for thyself, and our hearts are restless until they find their rest in thee." Both C.S. Lewis and St. Augustine conclude that our longing for that elusive something more is our longing for God. And that is what Jesus offers to the crowd. Bread that will satisfy that hunger for something more. So how does the crowd respond? They demand a sign. Now keep in mind, these are the same people who the day before saw the miracle of the loaves and fishes. But perhaps they're hoping that Jesus will do that magic trick again. In other words, it's a last-ditch effort to get that free lunch. Well, give us a sign. Maybe feed us again. In making their demand for the sign, the crowd uses a story of the manna from heaven. And that's an interesting story and worth recalling. The Israelites are led out of captivity in Egypt, and they wander for a few months out of the wilderness, and they run out of food. And so, of course, they start grumbling. We should have just stayed in Egypt. We were slaves, but at least we had something to eat. So God told Moses that he would rain bread from heaven. And the next morning, this flaky stuff, like wafers made with honey, were all over the ground. They ate this manna, this bread from heaven, for the next 40 years. Now, one of the strange things about this manna is that you could not store it. Excuse me. It spoiled within 24 hours. So everyone only took what they could use for that day. No hoarding was allowed. And bringing in that story of manna, of the bread of heaven, into today's gospel, I'm inclined to think about how we use our own manna, our own blessings from God. Those of us who have recognized that the itchless itch for something more can only be satisfied by having a relationship with God have been deeply blessed. And what do we do with those blessings? Do we hoard them, afraid that there might not be enough of God's grace, so we keep it all for ourselves, so that we will never run out? The blessings we receive are expressions of God's love, God's grace, God's unmerited favor. That grace is constantly flowing, and there is no danger of us ever running out. But if we try to hold on to it, it spoils. It becomes something else. It becomes an unhealthy relationship with God that ends up with us being satisfied and little thought given to the rest of the world. It becomes me and Jesus against the world. That's not healthy. In other words, if God's blessings are not shared, they spoil. As I've mentioned to you before, when we accept God's gift of grace, we are transformed into conduits of grace. God's grace flows through us out into the world. We are blessed so that we might become a blessing for others. This relationship with God is made known to us through the bread of life, Jesus Christ, who lived, died, and was raised up so that all of humanity might take its rightful place as the adopted sons and daughters of God. And that is what this deep longing is all about. It's as if we've been lost, but have finally found our way home, and are once again members of the household of God. This is the food that endures for eternity, that Jesus offers the crowd and us. Today, as we receive the body of Christ, the bread of heaven, let us offer our thanksgivings to God for our many blessings and commit ourselves to becoming a blessing for others.